Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while, but it's been a little bit crazy here for me to make a story, but I definitely got a story for you guys today. Before I go into my story, remember to subscribe, turn on that bell notification, and leave any comments of any story ideas you got for me or any comments that you want to leave about this story, because this one is going to be a little out there. The reason I remembered this story, I completely had forgotten about it, but I was actually on the phone with my friend the other day and we were having this conversation about her and I possibly maybe living together. And then I remember, like, in the middle of the conversation, I was like, how do you feel about guests? Like, what are your rules for guests? And I think she could sense that, man, you must have had a bad experience or something for you to ask me that way. I'm like, yeah, because I don't want you to tell me something now and then it turns into something later. Like, the rules may change and all of a sudden our friendship, you know, is not, we're not friends anymore. We came up to an agreement or whatever, but it reminded me of this story and why I was so traumatized and why I had to emphasize with her, like, what's your rule on guests? Because I don't ever want to go through this again. And I really, really care about Rebecca, and I would never want to lose her friendship over something as far as living with somebody. Not all my experiences have been bad, but like a couple of them just didn't turn out good. But this one is probably the worst one. So I don't know what I'm going to call this story. I guess this is like, I don't want to say the worst roommate ever, because he actually wasn't a bad roommate. It's just how things played out that made me want to leave. So I don't know, let me think of the title as I go along, but this just has to do with roommates, okay? Which I think is something that I'm gonna have a good time reading the comments, because I think that everyone at some point in life has had a roommate that somehow you're just like, bro, I didn't think that this was gonna go this way. Like, anyways, I'm gonna get started on how I ended up living with this person, just so you guys can have a little bit of a background of why I needed a roommate. Because at the time I was living with my parents and I didn't really need a roommate, so to speak. The only times I have ever left my house to live with someone has always been either for a relationship reason or anything work related. But the majority of the time that you guys have ever seen me move somewhere on social media has always been work stuff. This all happened in 2014 and I had opened my own cell phone shop. A lot of you guys remember that. So I had done that. And as a business owner, you know that just because you open your own business doesn't mean that you're just automatically gonna make all this money. Like, a lot of people don't know all the work that goes into owning your own company. Not only that, you actually work twice as hard as you just going to a 9-to-5 and clocking in, clocking out and being able to go home. Like, it wasn't like that at all. But that's not, I knew that going in. It wasn't anything that surprised me. Again, I don't want to get too much into the business because it's just, there's a lot of stuff that it's going to be irrelevant to the story. I can do my cell phone shop story another day. This is just explaining why I ended up needing actually get a roommate. You have to pay for the lease. You have to pay for the inventory. I had 2 car payments at the time. I had a lot on my plate. And I just felt like my savings was just like boom, 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 boom. And I'm like, all right. Because again, you know, you just because you own a business doesn't mean that you're just going to make money like that off the bat. Some people, it does. Like, it depends on the business. But in a cell phone store, the commissions usually took about 6 months. So I'm like, yeah, I'm going to see all this crazy money, but it's going to take 6 months for me to see it. So right now, I need to be smart and I need extra money coming in. So my sister, Stephanie, was helping me at the time. And I told her, I was like, okay, Stephanie, listen, I'm going to find another job. And that way I have extra income coming in so I can at least pay all the extra bills, have money for inventory. And then I'm going to just have you work the store by yourself, you know, for the day, the 5 days I'll be over there, 5 days you'll be here. Because it was still slow enough that the only one person could actually run the store. So it worked out. She was like, okay, that's a good idea. She's like, but when are you going to sleep? I was like, I don't know, because the days off, I'll work here. That way you are able to rest. Which, side note, I'm a hustler. Like, I do what I got to do to make my money work. So I went online and I remember applying for CarMax. And I was like, okay, I sold cars before, but I didn't want to go back to the original dealer that I worked at. I just wanted something 40 hours a week that I could work that and then still run my business at the same time. I don't know how I was gonna do it, but I was gonna make it work. I was determined because I'm a determined person. Everything happened really fast. Like, I literally just uploaded my resume. They called me the next day. Literally the next day after that, I got an interview. And like within the week, I was already working. The only bad thing was that the girl was like, listen, we're ready to hire you, but the only opening we have is in Tampa. Just to give you an idea, I live in Haines City. So Haines City to Tampa is about an 1.5-hour drive. I originally wanted to work at the Orlando location, but they were just packed. They weren't hiring. The lady liked me so much that she's like, listen, I can offer you a job. I just can't offer you a job in Orlando because we just don't have an opening, but I can hire you for the Tampa location. In my mind, I was like, listen, I will drive. I will make it work. Like, I'm gonna do it. So I'm thinking about all of that and I'm like, I'll take the job. So I did. So that means that I had to run my cell phone store, work a 40-hour job, and on top of the fact that it was a 40-hour work week, it also was an hour and a half drive. So then I would come home and I'm like, I don't even know how I'm gonna sleep. Like I haven't even put sleep in my schedule, but whatever, I want something, I'm gonna get it happening, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna work for it, I'm gonna get whatever. Because like I said, I was just really determined, because you're gonna kill yourself in the beginning, but it's all gonna pay off later on. I finally get to Tampa, right? So I'm working there, whatever the case. So a lot of the guys, you know, started spreading out. I'm a friendly person, so within like 2 or 3 weeks, people were already noticing, yo, she lives an hour and a half away. Like all my CarMax friends were like, yo, you really live an hour and a half away? I was like, yeah, I gotta do what I gotta do. So they were like, oh my God, but why don't you get an apartment, everything like that, which it seemed like that would be the smart thing to do. But again, I had to pay my leasing office. I had 2 car payments. I had insurances. And the 2 car payments was because I had bought my dad a car. So I had a car and I got my parents a car. So that's why I had 2 car payments. Everything else on top of my regular bill. So I'm like, on top of everything that I had, plus the inventory and everything, I couldn't just add another $1,200 apartment or $900 apartment or whatever, no matter what. So I was like, I'll take the risk. And I know that people are gonna be like, oh, but the gas, you're gonna spend so much money on gas. I get it, but I had a gas-friendly car at the time. And if you do the math, I wasn't spending that much money on gas either. I think I spent like a little over $300. So again, it wasn't really something that I'm like, if I get an apartment, it's not gonna help me out. It's actually just gonna put me in more debt. So just to answer the question, I know a lot of people are gonna be like, well, why didn't you get your own place? Well, I'm trying to explain to you, my money was tight and I just couldn't add another apartment payment on top of that. I actually had an old, she wasn't a girlfriend or anything like that, just somebody that I used to date, and she lived in Tampa and we were still in touch. And like I said, guys, I'm weird. I'm friends with all my exes. So she's not an ex, but she was somebody that I had dated. She actually visited me at CarMax, and you know, we just had like coffee or something like that. And she's like, oh, you're here. I was like, hey, it's good to see you. And then I was like, how far off are you from here? And she's like, oh, I'm only 8 minutes away. And in my mind, I'm like, man, she is only 8 minutes away and I'm an hour and a half. So I'm like, all right, let me take a risk here. So I did. I ended up calling her and I'm like, listen, I know it's gonna be a little bit awkward. I know you have a boyfriend. I know you got kids, but I'm in a little bit of a bind and I have a proposition for you. You let me know if you're okay with that. So my proposition to her was, let me rent one of the rooms in your house, talk to your boyfriend, see if he's okay with that or whatever, and then let me know. I explained to her my driving situation. Remember, she told me that she told him and he was mad. He's like, oh, you're gonna have some girl living here? What if I want to walk around in my underwear? What if she flirts with me? What if she's checking me out? Like, this guy made it all about him. Friend was like, I don't think that's gonna happen because she likes girls anyway. So then he got mad. Oh, she likes girls. And all of a sudden it was a big deal because all of a sudden now I was gay. So I'm like, so when I was straight, it wasn't a problem because you just thought I was gonna hit on you. Please, if I was gonna hit on any man, definitely wasn't gonna be him. Long story short, she ended up calling me and she's like, my boyfriend did kind of have a problem with it, but like we can work it out. So we worked out a number. I told her, let's try it out for 30 days. If it doesn't work for 30 days, then I'll leave, it's okay. And she's like, all right, so we'll do it. The thing is that I already didn't like her boyfriend. Like, we had been friends and everything for so long, and the things that she would tell me about him, I'm like, she really is with a horrible guy. And I'm gonna see that, but I'm not gonna get in the middle of that because she's no longer anything of mine. And she's not my responsibility anymore. So I'm like, all right, whatever. I ended up moving in with her. It's like a small room because obviously it was her son's room. So it was like toys everywhere. He had like a little bunk bed. I think I slept on the bottom bunk. But whatever. I didn't even have a TV. I used to watch TV on my phone. But it was 8 minutes and that's all I cared about. I didn't care about the place. It didn't need to be nice. It didn't need to be big. I was just like, listen, I just want to be able to sleep more, drive less, and be closer to my job. And she did me a huge favor and I will always be grateful for that. Why did I end up leaving there? Was because one day I got home. I remember I was doing Herbalife at the time, and Herbalife is easy. You got to make the little water at first, then you make the tea, then you make the shake. So I was in the kitchen doing all that. While I'm doing that, she's like really cooking up a meal. She's like making arroz con habichuela with a whole bunch of stuff, and like I remember corn, and I was like, yo, you really wifey type. And she's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna cook for him so when he gets home, like all this is ready. I was really impressed. I'm like, yo, so I made a joke. And I'm like, I should have wifed you up when I had the chance. Again, we didn't work out for a lot of reasons, but I still think she's a great girl. We just didn't work out. I'm like, oh, that's what's up. Like, you guys know how I feel about somebody cooking for you. That's so sweet. I don't care what you cook for me. But she didn't make nothing for me. Everything was for him. But I was just really impressed with that. But I did remember that when she put it down on the table, in my mind, I'm like, yo, it's gonna get cold because she put it down on there for a minute y él todavía no ha llegado, and I feel like it's gonna get cold. But you know, out of sight, out of mind. At that point, I was on level 2 in my Herbalife. Yo estoy con mi té, she's doing her thing in la cocina, we talking, nah. Okay, whatever. Remember, I already didn't like the guy. He comes home that day, and I mean, it was just such a like blah hello. He's like, what's up to me? You can already tell him and I don't like each other. So I literally just chugged my tea. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna chug my tea, I'm gonna make my shake, and I'm gonna be out, because yo no quiero ver ni en pintura, yo quiero ver este hombre. I really didn't like him. I didn't like the way he treated her. Then this happened. As I'm making my shake, he sits down, he tells her, yo, this food is cold. He's like, well, and then he shoves the plate and he's like, why are you giving me cold food? And I remember that I'm making my shake, like I'm holding my little spoon, and I'm like, Biggie, don't say nothing, no te metas en esto, you don't know if that guy has a gun, like anything can happen, this is not for you. And I'm like, I shouldn't even be here right now, like this is the wrong, I should have moved in with another girl that didn't have a boyfriend. I just really felt uncomfortable, and I'm like, yo me tengo que ir de aquí, loca de verdad. So I'm like this. When she looks at me, I could tell that she was embarrassed, like she looked really embarrassed, and I'm like, yeah, pobrecita. You know, she grabs his plate, like, oh, excuse me, no, it's cold, and she's like, beep, 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 putting it in the microwave, and I'm just like, don't say nothing, don't say nothing. I'm like, oh my god, I'm over here hyping her up, making such a big deal, saying, oh my god, you're so wifey type, like, and in my mind I'm like, man, offer me something, you know. But I'm like, oh, let me not mess with her food or nothing. And then this guy complains about the food being cold, and I'm just like, if a girl cooked for me and the food was cold, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna get my 2 chicken legs and I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna put it in the microwave myself. I'm not gonna tell my girl, yo, it's cold. Like, I'm just gonna get up and put it in the microwave. Like, it's not that difficult. But anyways, while it's in the microwave, he goes to change, and I'm just looking at her like, oh, I'm just gonna make my shake and I'm gonna be out of your way. Like, I'm acting like I didn't see what just happened. It was just so awkward. He came back and I'm just like, okay, yo me tengo que ir de aquí, because I'm gonna continue to see that. And eventually I will say something, and this is not my problem. I am not Dr. Phil. I am not gonna resolve this issue. She's been with this guy for years and he's treated her this way. She wants to be in this relationship. Allá ella, this is not for me. I don't wanna be here. So I told her, I think it was literally about 2 weeks in, and I was like, hey, listen, something came up, so I'm actually not gonna live here anymore. And I know that I kind of sprung that on you at last minute, but what I'm gonna do, I'm still gonna pay you for the 30 days. Because then I felt bad. I was like, yo, she was already tight with money as it was, and I didn't want to do that to her. Like, you know, como que ella ya contaba con eso, so imagine me cutting it in half. So I didn't do that. I'm gonna still pay you for the 30 days, but like, I'm gonna leave. And she's like, oh, is everything okay? I'm like, no, mommy, everything is good. It's just I'm gonna do something else. And she's like, ah, pues está bien. I left because I was like, I can't be here. This is not good even for me, because that's not an environment that I've ever been around or has grown up around. So I'm like, I'm gonna probably fight this guy, and I don't need to do that, because first of all, she's not even my girl anymore. So I'm like, this is not. So I ended up leaving. So the story continues, because that wasn't even what happened with the roommate. That was one roommate that I had in Tampa. So I go back to work and I'm having a conversation with my coworkers, and then they were like, oh, but I thought you had moved in with what's her face. And I'm like, no, you know, that didn't work out. I didn't get into detail. I was just like, you know, that didn't work out, so now I'm stuck back to normal. But I did get into detail with my coworker, and we're gonna call him Bob. Bob was great. He was an older gentleman. He was an older gay gentleman, and we just clicked because of that. He was so cool, and I told him everything, and he's like, you know what? He's like, I have my own place, and you know what? Why don't you come by and check it out? And if you like it, I'll rent it for you for $75 a week. And I'm like, Bob, are you serious? Like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, you're in a bind. I can totally tell. He's like, you seem really cool. He's like, just come by after work, see if you like the place. And if you do, I'll only charge you $75 a week. And in my mind, I'm like, that is so cheap. I'm like he really helped me out in the worst of times that in my life, because I'm like, oh my god. So after work, I went to check out his place. It was a 2-bedroom apartment. You could tell it was a very bougie apartment. The area itself, everything was just very it was one of those luxury apartments in Tampa. He's giving me the tour. When I walk, he shows me his room, and he's like, this is my room, you know, this is the kitchen, whatever. And then he's like, this will be your room, and you'll have your own bathroom too. He's like, just the only thing is that your bathroom will be on the outside. And in my mind, I'm like, a mí me importa, ese baño podía estar afuera. Like, I don't care. I just needed something to be closer to my job. I forgot to mention this, but the agreement that I had with my manager was that I was gonna work in the Tampa location for 6 months, and after 6 months I can actually relocate to the Orlando location. It was like, yeah, that works out, but I can only relocate. I had to wait 6 months, and I'm like, I'm only gonna do this for 6 months. So that's another reason why I didn't get an apartment. Anyway, so he shows me the second bedroom, and it was a pretty big bedroom. I was like, wow. So he's like, look, you'll have your own bed, you have a TV, you have your own bathroom. And I'm like, oh my God, I even had a TV, and it was just so big. It was like a spacious closet too. And I'm like, all of this for $75 a week? I'm like, that's insane. So I'm like, yeah. He's like, how do you like it? And I'm like, I love it. I was like, yo, thank you, Bob. I'm like, listen, there's no lease agreement or anything like that. So what are the rules? Like, I need to know all the rules right from the get. That way I don't mess up, because I'm a very respectful person. You know what I mean? And he's like, I really don't like messes. I'm a very, very clean person. And in my mind, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna get kicked out because I'm a messy person. But then I'm like, well, what if I leave a mess in my room? And he's like, oh, I don't care about your room. He's like, you can have a whole mess in your room. I just don't want to see the mess outside. I never want to see a mess in the living room. And he's like, and oh my God, I never ever want to see a dirty plate in the sink. Like, he's like, you cook something, you do whatever, but it needs to be clean. He's like, I never want to wake up and see a plate in the sink. Like, I really have to have a clean kitchen. And I'm like, okay, I got you. I'll definitely clean the kitchen. I got it. I'm like, anything else? And then he's like, well, since you're only paying $75 a week, your 2 days off, I would just need you to go home. That way I can have my privacy to do whatever I want. And I'm like, oh, no doubt. I was going to do that anyways. Like, my 2 days off, I was never going to be here because I miss my family. I was that close to my parents. So I'm like, that it works out. I'm like, anything else? The last thing was guests. I'm like, listen, what are your rules on guests? Because I do have a couple people that I know in Tampa. I don't really doubt that they're gonna come over or anything like that. But still, what's your take on that? This is what he said from the very beginning. He said, oh, you can bring whoever you want. Have a booty call, you can do whatever. Literally, he said, I could even have a booty call. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, no, Bob. I was like, listen, I'm gay, but I'm not that gay. I was like, that's not gonna happen. And he's like, really? And I'm like, you'll see, you live with me, you're gonna know. I was like, I'm not gonna do that, but good to know that I can do that but no, but I met like friends or something like that. And he's like, no, I don't have a problem with that. And I'm like, all right, cool. That was literally everything he said from the beginning, verbatim. And I'm like, okay, sorry I had to throw the booty call in there because my stuff is usually very clean, but I wanted you guys to get the full story of what this man said to me from the very beginning when I decided to live with him. But now that I moved everything, I told my parents, I mean, living with this man was amazing. I barely ever heard from him. He was a wonderful cook, like a great cook. He was white, and it was funny because one day I come home to like this whole Mexican dinner, and I'm like, you made all of this? And he's like, of course, I dated a Mexican one time. I was like, oh my God. So he was always cooking up all these like international meals because he had dated so many men from so many different countries. And I'm like, oh, I mean, he was a superb cook. Every time he would cook, I would do the dishes. I'm like, listen, you cook for me, so I'll do the dishes. And he's like, oh my God, really? I was like, yeah, I got you. When I tell you guys, it was amazing. And him and I actually really got close. In the event, when you become roommates with somebody, you start sharing things about yourself. So he would share things about himself. I started sharing things about myself. So I confessed to him something that I didn't confess to anybody else. Like, none of my friends in Tampa knew this. He was literally the only one. Like, I'm tight right now with money. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I told him about the business, etc. He understood. And I even took it a step further, and I'm like, listen, I'm even looking for like a putt-putt car because the car that I have right now, I need to just, I can't afford 2 car payments right now. And he's like, really? He's like, well, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, I'm just gonna let it get repoed. And he's like, really? I was like, yo, I'm just that tight right now. So you really helping me out with the $75 a week. That's good. You were a complete blessing. I told my parents that, and everybody loved him. Like, all my friends like raved about him. Like, he was just like, yo lo tenía aquí. So what's gonna happen next? Again, I'm not here to bash him or anything like that because I will always be grateful for what he did for me. But maybe what happened next, I feel like this is where I'm just so impulsive that things ended the way that they did. And sometimes I look back and I was like, dude, we could have totally fixed that if we just had talked about it. I actually had friends in Tampa, but they were like from my old church. Our church in Kissimmee was in concilio with a couple of churches from Tampa. So I had church friends in Tampa. Only thing is that we no longer went to church, but we were still church friends. So one of my church friends hits me up and we actually start communicating. She's like, Mira, you know, you're living in Tampa, I saw on your Instagram, whatever. So we linked up and I was like, cool. So her and I started hanging out. Her and her sisters. I had 2 friends in Tampa and they introduced me to a 3rd friend. So we were all kind of like always hanging out, us 3. And it started being fun because I didn't feel so lonely anymore in Tampa. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be here for 6 months. And if I'm going to be here for all these months with these girls, it's going to be real cool. Everything was going great. The girls and I were like constantly hanging out. So I would always hang out with them and then I would come home to Bob's place. So it was always like that back and forth. And one day, one of the girls hits me up and she's like, Mira, can we go to your place? And I'm like, I don't know, dude. I had already been living with Bob for like a month. And I'm like, I don't know, I had never really brought a guest over here. I don't think he would mind, but like, I don't really want to bring anybody. And they were like, oh, but you know, we'll come over, blah, blah, blah. One of my friends was like, girl, you're not living there for free. You're paying rent. So like, I'm pretty sure you can have a guest. And I'm like, all right, well, it's all 3 of y'all. So it's going to be 3 at once. So I'm like, all right, hold on. Let me call him up. Let me see what he thinks. Then I came out of my room and I was like, hey, Bob, you know, I have a couple of friends coming over. You know, is that okay? You know, they're just going to come over right now. It was a little late, not too late, but it was like maybe like 9, 10. And he's like, oh, sure, no problem. Have him come over. And I was like, all right. So I told the girls, hey, listen, he said it was okay. Come through. And then one of my friends was like, oh, mira, I even brought chicken. Like, I'm going to bring some food so we can give to your roommate. And I'm like, oh, yeah, word. I think he's going to love that. So they come in. What I do remember is that we were a little loud. Like, oh, hey, what's up? Oh, my God. You know, and they were loud too. I was loud. And I remember one of my friends going right into the kitchen. That's my pet peeve. And it wasn't even my apartment. And I'm like, oh, I really hate when somebody just goes straight to I'm very old school. I don't like when people go into the kitchen. I feel like if you come to my house, stay in the living room. You don't got to go to my kitchen for nothing in the world other than if I tell you to come into the kitchen. So one of them went right into the kitchen. She started you know, taking everything out of the bag. I think she even opened the refrigerator to get ice to like give us. And I'm just like, oh my God. So I'm just like, it's not that it's bad. It's just that I'm not used to that. I don't really like that. And I felt like, yo, this is the first time I invite you over and you're already opening his refrigerator. Like this is not even my apartment. This is his apartment. So I was freaking out and I could tell with his face that he was like, man, these girls are loud. I can tell that he was bothered that we were just being so loud. And I'm like, yeah, I can tell que él está molestando. So I told the girls, I was like, mira, vámonos de aquí because I can tell que él está como que molesto. We even, and then we offered him food and he didn't want the food. We're like, oh, we bought chicken, we bought this. It was like Publix chicken with like them little Hawaiian rolls. And we're offering him and he didn't want it. So we're just like, all right, well, all right. So we take all the food and we go to my room. We were laughing, joking, eating chicken, whatever, for hours. We were just talking. Nothing bad, like nothing crazy. It was just the first time in like a month that I lived there that I actually brought guests over. I think maybe I shouldn't have brought so many guests at the same time, but I don't know, whatever. Girls decided to leave, but you know, nothing more, okay? Ja, every time we would hang out, I would just hang out with them because I was like, nah, I don't think I'm gonna have so many people come over because I could feel that, I could tell that he was a little bit uneasy with that. So going forward, I'm just not gonna bring un corillo again. I'm just gonna bring like just maybe one friend. Again, one of my Tampa friends, her 30th birthday was coming up. It was like a very bougie, very nice 30th birthday. It was gonna be on a boat and we all had to dress up. So one of my friends was like, Mira, can I come over to your place? I'll get dressed over there and then we could just leave together. And I'm like, okay, cool, not a problem. This was about a week later. I text Bob and I'm like, hey, listen, one of my friends from that night, it's gonna come over. She's gonna get dressed and everything like that over here, and then from here we're gonna leave to, you know, to the birthday party. Is that okay? When I said this story later on, people were always like, well, why did you always ask him if you could bring a roommate? Like at the end of the day, he said you could have just brought anybody. I still felt uncomfortable just bringing people over because he had been so good to me that I just never wanted to ever disrespect him. Plus, I can already tell that he was uneasy that first time. So if he would have told me no, I would have understood because I didn't want to lose the fact that we were 11 minutes from Carmack. So I asked him, I was like, hey, she's gonna come over, we're gonna get ready here and then leave together. He said it was okay. Dale. He even takes our picture. He's like, oh, you know, you guys look so good because we both had to dress up, whatever. We go to the party, had a great time, out of sight, out of mind. A few days later, I don't know how many, he tells me that he's going out of town. He's like, listen, I'm going out of town. I'm gonna be out for 2 days. And he's like, I'll be back. So he's like, and I'm like, okay, cool. He would always check in with me just like I would check in with him. And I'm like, all right, cool. One of the girls was texting me, one of my friends, and she was like, hey, listen, me and Fulana are together. I'm gonna call this friend Susie. So Susie was texting me and she said, hey, me and Fulana wanna come over. So is that okay? And I'm like, I think so, because he went out, but he left. So let me just make sure. So I text him. I was like, hey, listen, Susie wants to bring Fulana over and we're just gonna watch a movie and, you know, we're just gonna be in my room. I hope, you know, I hope that's okay. Or something like that, I said. You know how when the iPhone, you can see with the person's bubble, you're like, bubble, bubble, bubble. And then you're like, you know, so I can see the bubble, but it would go away. I could see the bubble and then it would go away. I'm like, okay. So I just ended up throwing my phone and I'm thinking, okay, if the girls are gonna come over, let me start getting popcorn and stuff like that ready so they can come over. Remember that this guy knew everything about me. He knew my finance issues. He even knew that I was actually letting my dad's car get repoed because I couldn't even afford that. Like, he knew everything about me that nobody else knew, that all these Tampa friends didn't know, and are gonna figure this out now watching this video, because I never wanted to confess that. Who wants to confess that? That's so embarrassing, you know what I mean? So he knew all of that. His text back was, you know, it's becoming a little bit more frequent that you're having so many guests come over. I think that we should rediscuss your rent. I'm like, and I'm looking at this like, wait, what? What is me bringing guests have to do with me raising the rent? They're not showering, they're not doing anything. When Susie came over to get ready, she didn't even shower. Like, you know, she came over, she was always dressed. It was to like do our hairs and stuff. And I'm like, what? So in my mind, I'm reading that, and I'm a really quick tempered person. If you didn't know that, now you know. I was pissed. I'm looking at that like, okay? Like, it really boggled my mind and it hurt me. Then I'm like, bro, you know my money situation. You're really gonna raise my rent because I decided to have friends come over? That doesn't make any sense. I'm like, are you serious right now? And he's like, yes, I'm very serious. It's becoming more frequent. He's like, you should pay a little bit more rent. And I'm just like, so he said it again, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. So I'm texting Susie, and I'm like, yo, you will never believe what this guy just told me. She's like, en serio? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, girl, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I'm leaving. I was like, I felt like, why would I want to stay with somebody that knows my situation, and then you told me I can have guests before I ever brought anybody over? I always told you, and now you want to charge me extra for that? I'm like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I'm like, all right, really was getting mad. Help me understand. So I wrote to him, I was like, help me understand how from the moment we moved in, I asked you what were the rules. You even told me I could have a booty call. This is why I mentioned it from the beginning, because this is how I replied to that. Help me understand how you are okay with a booty call, but you're not okay with my friends coming over to watch a movie. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why should I pay more rent? And he said, because it's becoming more frequent. Which, again, to me, I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, did I hurt this guy? Did I say anything to offend him? Like, what happened? I'm still thinking about the day of the kitchen, that they were all there. I'm like, did we do anything wrong? Did we break something? Like, all I know, I was like, you know what? Don't worry, my friends are not coming over. Take care. I was like, yo no puedo creer esto. So again, this is along with my temper, I'm also impulsive. And as much as I talk, I have a really bad thing with communicating, because I really feel like years later, I'm like, if we would just have talked about this would have gone completely different. But mi impulso, my temper, and I'm much older now, and I'm just like, man, if I would have just communicated this to him, if I would have told him, I know that things would have gone completely differently. But the way I handled everything was just not, like, it wasn't cool on my end. That's why I couldn't say anything like, oh, this is the worst roommate story ever, because he wasn't. I'm not here to say he was the worst roommate. It's just, I didn't really like that. Like, that really took me for a loop. I'm like, what? Like, de donde salió? Like, I still don't understand to this day how that even got to that. I confess to things to you that I haven't told anybody else. Like, I'm freaking going through a repo right now, and you're gonna charge me raw rent. No say, like, I really felt like it was a slap in the face. Like, I don't know, because I was like, I genuinely didn't see anything wrong. I'm like, I was paying rent, you told me I could have guests, if anything, for like a one night, but I couldn't have friends to watch. Like, to me, it just didn't make any sense, to the point that I'm like, I'm gonna be uncomfortable living here right now, because I didn't like that. I could have handled that many different ways, but again, there's no excuse. This is what I did next. I text my friends, I told them what happened, and they all felt bad. And I'm like, guys, I'm leaving. I don't care. Like, yo le voy a pagar esta semana. I'm gonna pay him the rest of the week, and I'm gonna be out, because I'm just not gonna feel comfortable living here anymore. So they felt awful. They were like, oh my God, we just got you kicked out. I'm like, he didn't kick me out. I'm choosing to leave. So what I did is that I turned off my phone, because I was like, I can't be in the middle of this. I can't multitask on top of that, because I was already so enraged. So I packed all my stuff, little by little, and I'm like, that's it, I'm leaving. And I ended up leaving. And what sucks is that he lived on the 3rd floor, so I was going back, up, and down. Things that took me like days and days and days to be able to bring up to his place, I had to do it in a matter of hours. So it was just like up and down, up and down. And on top of everything else, it started raining. Te digo, bien película. I was like, are you serious? It's raining right now? So I was getting wet, bringing all my stuff. I grabbed all my food. I grabbed everything. I cleaned everything because I also didn't want to leave like that. Cleaned the room, I made the bed, I cleaned the bathroom, I did everything. I took everything out. I literally packed, I don't know how everything fit in my car, and I left back home. And I'm like, okay, I had to come up with an excuse. What am I gonna tell my parents? Because even if I'm gonna lie to my mom, you know, she's gonna just know that something's wrong. So I need to come up with something, especially that it was raining. So on the way, I called my friends, and they're like, oh my God, ¿qué te pasó? They're all worried about me. I told them what I did, and they were all like, I can't believe that he was acting like that. I was like, I don't know. So of course everybody was gonna take my side. I'm like, was I wrong? Like, should I have stayed? They're like, no, you know, now you're gonna feel uncomfortable. It's gonna be awkward, you living with him. Like, I would have done the same thing. I don't know, you guys tell me what you would have done. So anyways, I got home, you know, like my mom looked at my car, like everything was in my car, and I came in with my suitcase, and I'm like, hey, I'm like trying to play it all off, like, hey, mommy, ¿cómo tú estás? She's like, ¿qué pasó? I'm like, mommy, no, nothing. I just decided to come back home, you know, and everything like that. I was like, I'm gonna make a couple of changes in my plans, yada, yada, yada. My mom's like, oh, okay, but she knew. She's like, all right, I'm not even gonna bother her. I already know something's going on, but I'm gonna let her tell me whenever she wants to tell me. So anyways, I did. I ended up telling my mom later on what happened. She's like, yo lo sabía, ay, nena, yo estaba orando. You know how Christian moms are. By the time he got home, he probably realized that, you know, I wasn't there. So he didn't text me. He didn't reach out like, hey, why aren't you here? Like, what happened? Nothing. He was just like, wait, si se quiere ir, que se vaya. So he didn't reach out to me either. And then I'm like, man, I have to see this guy at work. It's gonna be so awkward. So I did. I saw him at work, and I went to give him the key. I was like, hey, this is your key. He's like, thank you. And he just kept walking. I'm like, this anyways, so I'm like, but that, so I was like, okay, needless to say, we're not gonna fix our friendship. That's not going anywhere. I respect the fact that he never told anybody at CarMax what happened. Neither did I. We didn't bash each other. People were just like, hey, you're not living with Bob anymore. And I'm like, we're not living together. At the end of the day, I do have a very good work ethic in me. And I'm like, I'm not gonna bash him. People don't need to know our dirty laundry like that. And I hate that too. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. This is the first time I'm ever saying anything about it. He's not a bad person. I have nothing bad to say. He saved me almost like 2 months, you know, living in a good place. Just the whole, how he worded it, maybe he should have said it differently. I took it personal, then he took it personal. Neither of us fixed it. So it was just like, ayato, you know. A little bit after that, I noticed that he took me off of Facebook. He actually blocked me on Facebook. I was like, oh wow, is that serious now? I was like, okay, está bien. I ended up coming back to Susie, and Susie was actually going through a divorce at the time. And she's like, hey, listen, I got a new place. Why don't you come check it out? And I was like, oh my God, divorce party. So I went to see her, and I went to hang out with her. She hugged me. She's like, man, I'm so sorry. She felt awful. She's like, if it was my idea, if I would have never said anything, you know, I can tell that the first time we went there, he was like uneasy with us. I'm like, it's not your fault. Like, you know, I needed to leave. I'll figure it out. Don't worry. I was like, I got like what, 2 months before I go to the Orlando store. I'll be fine. I'll just drive the 2 months. She gave me a tour of her apartment, and she's like, oh, this is my apartment. She's like, listen, I left my townhouse because, you know, I'm getting a divorce now, so this is all I could afford. And she's like, it's very, very small. I'm like, dude, you're by yourself. You left your man. Like, you know how many women are stuck in relationships that they don't leave? I was like, you left. Yeah, the place is small, but you left. Like, you're good. You're able to start over your life, meet somebody else, etc. Give me the tour, and it was a small place. Like as soon as you would walk in, it's like the living room, kitchen, bedroom. But I was very proud of my friend because I was like, yo, she really left this guy. Like, I know a lot of girls don't do that. So I was very proud of her. By the way, she's like, you can stay here for the rest of the 2 months. She's like, I'm not gonna charge you rent, and you can have whatever you want in the kitchen. We could be roommates. She's like, she's like, the only thing is I don't have a room for you, so you would just have to sleep maybe on like a matre on the floor, but I'm not gonna charge you rent. And I'm like, what? Like, that blew my mind because I'm like, she's tight for money and she wants me to stay with her for free. I'm like, I could never do that. So it was just one of those things that I'm like, so it was funny because I kept going from roommate to roommate to roommate in Tampa. She felt so bad and so guilty, but I'm like, you didn't have to feel guilty. Like, it wasn't your fault. Like, it really wasn't. I'm like, I'm not gonna live here for free. What I look like. But I did. I ended up living with her, and it was so much fun. Living with her. When you live with somebody, you really get to know them, and she got to know a whole different side of me when it came to like things that she didn't know. And it was a fun time. It was probably if I have to go back in time and think about one of the funnest roommates that I ever had, it was her, because we actually clicked. It was so good. I mean, I'll never forget that she took me out of a bind and was like, no, you could share your food, you could do whatever. Like, she just gave me her home sin poder. And I'm just like, I swear I'm always surrounded by such good people. Like, I know that people are always like, oh, but you're nice, and when you're nice you never get nothing in return. Let me tell you, I've been nice my whole life. And my whole life, I have always gotten blessed. I have always been able to get taken care of, because that's just how God looks out for his people. But she looked out for me, and it was probably, I have a lot of crazy adventures when that happened, but that's another story time. But anyways, that is my roommate situation. Please, I'm very curious what you guys think and how I handled that, because now that I think about it, you know, this was 2014, it's 2021 now. I feel like I'm just very ignorant when it comes to communication. I go through that. I really have. I don't like confrontation. I don't know how to do that. If we would have talked it out in the living room, like adults that we were, because we're both, I was in my 30s, he was in his 40s. I think that guy was almost 50. Actually, yeah, I think he was 50. Yeah. So we were adults, needless to say. So we should have sat down and, you know, hey, why did you feel like you sent me that text? Like, well, Abby, this is what I felt. You shouldn't have done this. And I felt uncomfortable, and I should have been like, all right, well, let's work something out. I apologize. I feel like if we really would have talked it out, that would have been an easy fix. But no communication was done from either party, so that's why everything just blew up the way it did. Again, I have nothing bad to say about him, other than the fact that I wish we would have just communicated that, because I would have just ended up in Tampa. But at the same time, God knows everything, because everything that happened with Susie was a lot more fun. Anyways, I really want to know what you guys think. I'm very curious. I love reading you guys' comments, so let me know what you guys think. So that's it. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Oh, and by the way, Susie's update, she did end up meeting somebody else who was way better than her husband, and she actually got married, and she had another little girl. So yes, ladies, leave your man. I'm just playing up. Like, wait, isn't this about roommates? And now she went talking about divorce. Again, I was just very proud of her for doing that. So the moral of this story is, honestly, communicate. I mean, I really feel that if there's anything that you could take away from this story, is just communicate. And I know that I'm saying that, and I'm still struggling with that. That actually gives me problems even in relationships. But I feel like if things are just said, you know, and talked about, all of this could have been completely prevented had him and I just sat down and discussed why he felt that he needed to say that, why I took it personal. And honestly, I wouldn't have left. Like, I just feel that everything could have been handled, and we would have still been friends. I haven't heard from this guy in years. So, you know, a friendship was lost. All of that was lost. I left, he took it personal, I took it personal. All that happened because neither of us communicated. So if you can take anything away from the story, is that just confront someone, do the communication, because that way you don't have to be in the middle of the night taking out all your stuff out of somebody's apartment from the 3rd floor. And hope you guys like this story. That's it. Sorry about my niece in the background, pobrecita, you know, parece que la están matando allá, but she's good. That's it, guys. Take care. Have a good night.